The Liberal government has announced its regulatory framework for capping emissions in the oil and gas sector. A national cap and trade system that it says will set emissions limits without restricting the production. The framework proposes to cap 2030 emissions at 35 to 38% below 2019 levels to reach the government's goal of reducing carbon emissions in the sector to net zero by 2050. The oil and gas sector is responsible for 28% of Canada's emissions. The government says it is publishing the framework now to give the industry and others time to provide input on the forthcoming draft regulations, which it says it will publish in mid-2024. Let's listen into what Energy Minister Jonathan Wilkinson has to say.
For Canada's oil and gas sector, climate change is not just an environmental issue. It is a competitiveness issue. As the world moves to reduce emissions generated by the production and the combustion of fossil fuels, oil and gas that is extracted with the lowest production emissions are expected to be in highest demand. This is true for both non-abated, combustion-related uses of oil and gas that will exist in smaller volumes as global demand declines over coming decades, but also for non-combustion applications of fossil fuels like petrochemicals, solvents, waxes, asphalt, carbon graphite, hydrogen, and others that will be continued to be needed in a net zero world. Aggressively reducing production-related emissions early and boldly can provide a significant competitive advantage for the sector and its workers. In recent years, Canada's oil and gas sector has made progress with respect to reducing emission intensity of production. Many leading firms in the sector have committed themselves to net zero by 2050, as have the provinces of Alberta, Newfoundland and Labrador, and British Columbia. However, ensuring long-term competitiveness of Canada's sector requires that it achieve significant and sustained reductions in absolute emissions on a pathway to net zero production by 2050. The Government of Canada has introduced incentives, regulations, and investments to encourage and support the oil and gas sector in this pursuit. This includes carbon pricing, investments in the Strategic Innovation Fund and the Clean Fuels Fund, and investment tax credits for carbon capture and sequestration and for the production of low-carbon hydrogen. Today, we are releasing the framework for Canada's emissions cap for the oil and gas sector. This cap is a key part of decarbonizing the sector on a path to net zero by 2050. It is critical to sustaining the competitiveness of Canada's industry over the coming decades.
IPTV.